Hey, I really appreciate that you agreed to have a talk. Yes, because I went to Bodh Gaya there and try to ask this information, but it seems like monks has some specialities, and not everyone knows English, and not everyone just do shamatha practice. So I gathered some questions regarding shamatha.
Sure.
Yeah, I will open them right now.
Mhm. Are you in Kiev?
Yes, I'm in Kiev.
But there was some bombing there today as well, no?
Yeah. Okay. One of the question is regarding these shamatha stages. So you gave a talk about that there are 9 stages,
Yeah.
and I really wonder the approach on passing on these stages. And the first question is, do Buddhists explicitly assess their level, their current level, and plan the strategy to move on to the next?
Yeah. It depends a little bit about what what shamatha practice you do. That 9-stage model is often used in conjunction with using, for example, the breath as the object.
Mm-hmm.
When your object is something else like the mind or just resting in awareness, often in the text they don't use this 9-stage model. So you tend not to measure your progress in those shamatha practices using these 9 stages. They usually use different models for that. So it depends. The short answer is it depends a little bit what object you use, whether you use this 9-stage model.
Breath.
Right, breath. Yeah, so breath is this model works well with the breath because the breath is a very discrete object, and we can use this 9-stage model to see how we're progressing in those 9 stages. And in the various descriptions of those 9 stages, there's very good description in Alan Wallace's Attention Revolution book,
Mm-hmm.
describing it. But historically, in the original Sanskrit text, there was in Kamala Shila's stages of meditation and also Asanga. In those texts, they talk about these 9 stages. So there are descriptions about what it means to be at every stage and what faults are still at that stage and how to move to the next stage. So you can use that model to see where you are and how to progress to the next stages.
Actually, I have this book in Russian, Attention Revolution. So I saw this table and descriptions, but I'm curious about the approach, kind of maybe to assess. Is it correct to say measure meditation progress or a kind of to have a plan on meditation? Because I really a little bit misunderstand on it.
Right. Yeah. I think it's very easy to misinterpret those 9 stages because, for example, say stage 4. Stage 4, you can hold the object the entire session without ever losing it. I mean, the quality still needs a lot of work. But now, as a beginner, you may have one session where things are going well and you can hold the breath for the entire session. That doesn't mean you're at stage 4. To be at stage 4, it means if that is your normal experience.
Mm-hmm.
If normally in meditation, you can meditate 1 hour and you can hold the breath for 1 hour without ever completely losing it, and that is your normal experience, then you're at stage 4. Only then.
Okay.
Because what can happen is, let's say you're at stage 4, you may find sometimes in a meditation things go well and you have a stage 5, 6 or 7 experience. Or another day there may be there's some agitation and you have a stage 2 or 3 or a 2 experience. So you can have a bit of fluctuation up or down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it sort of means to be at a certain stage, is if you look at the description about what the level of experience is, if that is your normal experience in shamatha in most of your sessions, then that's what it means to be at that level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now it's much clearer.
Yeah. So you could have, like I said, on one, you may be normally at stage 2, but then one day you have very good meditation and you have an experience like stage 4 or 5, but that's just a peak experience. That doesn't mean you're at stage 4 or 5.
Okay, I see that it should be normal experience.
That's your, not every time, but most of the time. If most of the time that is your experience in shamatha, that's what it means to be at that stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, I am in progress of reading this book, Attention Revolution, and it says that if we want to go to continue to move to next levels, we should have some more responsibilities on shamatha and on this practice, and even kind of come to solitary retreats. And frankly speaking, I have no such experience regarding solitary retreats, and I'm just trying to balance between work and other stuff that is in life. And I want to kind of still move on in this direction.
Right. Well, then what's important? See. Also here, a lot of people have misconception. People think, okay, what I need to do is stop my work and go in 6 months shamatha retreat, and then everything will be good. And then usually after 2 weeks, they stop because it's a disaster, because they're not ready. You have to have a basis for going to retreat. If you don't have that basis, then no point in going for a 6-month shamatha retreat, because it'll be a disaster and you'll give up after 2 or 3 weeks. And also with that is sometimes people don't go retreat, but at home they maybe they have quite a lot of time. Maybe they still work but still have a lot of time. So they do maybe 2 or 3 hours of shamatha every day, but they don't make any progress. And often the reason is what they do the rest of the day. They diligently meditate 2 hours or 3 hours shamatha, but then the rest of the day they run around like crazy in their old habits. So that any benefit from shamatha will be negated by not practicing the rest of the day. So if you want to progress, yes, you have to do some shamatha every day, but the key to progress is what you do the rest of the day. And if you're not actively doing things supporting that practice the rest of the day, then you won't make much progress. So, for example, to be very mindful of what we do through the day, to really cultivate mindfulness. But what I would really recommend here is in the Attention Revolution, there are these, you've probably read it already, the 6 prerequisites for shamatha.
Regarding them, few desires, yeah.
Yeah, those ones. They are very important. And the first one is supportive environment. And that's the outer conditions. So two things, they mentioned a number of things there, but two things very important there. One is where you meditate, quiet. If it's not quiet, if there's noise, then big distraction for shamatha. The second thing there, very important, is some good friends, meaning sangha, meaning if you try to do this by yourself, extremely difficult. You need help. So ideally, if you can physically meet with a couple of other people who have similar interest, if not, at least on using technology to virtually meet together to support each other, because otherwise it's very difficult as a beginner, because we have strong habits and we get swept up in our habits. Sometimes it's going well, but then we have a bad period, we're feeling depressed and we sort of give up because we're on our own. So very important to find these people. It doesn't only needs to be 2 or 3 people. I mean, if there's a Buddhist center nearby, great. But if not, find a couple of people who are doing something similar and connect together, maybe once a week or something, just to talk amongst yourself, to support each other, encourage each other, so you feel like you're not on your own. This is very important. So these 2 points in the first of the 6, supportive environment. Then the next 2, as you mentioned, few desires and being content. And so this 2 is to do with material things, money, wealth, possession. If we're thinking we need to get more money, more wealth, of course we need a certain amount of money to have a roof on our head and food in our stomach. But people tend to look out there for happiness. And they think if I have more money, if I have a nicer car, nicer apartment, nicer job, if these are better, I'll be more happy. And so they put all their effort into this. And so, of course, no time to meditate. So how to have few desires and be content is what's called preliminary practices. The 4 common preliminaries. And one of those is, the last one of those, is basically to cultivate the view of genuine happiness. Is to really see the source of suffering and happiness is not anywhere out there in the world. It's in our own mind. If we don't shift that perspective, then we're going to have a lot of desires and we're never going to be content. We're never going to have time to meditate because I'm too busy making money, accumulating more stuff, nicer apartment, nicer car, nicer this, nicer this. We're just going to put all our effort into that, and that's not going to work. So if we can make that shift, if we can really reflect, intellectually, we may understand source of happiness is not out there. That's not enough. We need to bring intellect to experience. We need to meditate, we need to reflect, to really start to taste the fact that happiness is coming within. If we can do that, then what you will see is all of these things that we have our focus on out there, we're going to lose interest. The TV I've got is good enough. The car I've got is good enough. The job I've got is good enough. I've got enough money. I've got enough food. It's enough. And then we can put all of our energy to developing ourselves. So that's for few desires, being content, number 2 and 3. Number 4 is few activities. So Again, often I hear people say, oh, I really want to meditate, but I'm too busy. No time. I've got no time to meditate. This is never a valid excuse. It is true, most people in the modern world are very busy. No time. Our day is full of stuff, full of activities. But some of those activities are essential. Most of us need to work so many hours to have enough money. Some people have got family responsibilities. Some people have some other responsibilities. But beyond those essential responsibilities, what do? We fill up our day with lots of activities. Why? Because often in the modern world, it's felt if we're not doing something, we're not being productive. So we need to do something to be productive. And also if we sit quietly and do nothing, we get agitated because it forces us to look at our mind, which is a mess. So we just distract ourselves. We busy ourselves with distractions so we don't have to look at our own mind. So to have few activities, we can try and cut things out forcibly. That's not going to work. Again, what's going to be helpful is preliminaries, the first two. And that is to reflect on precious human life and death. To understand we've got a precious life, lots of opportunity, and it's not going to last forever. Again, intellectually we know this. Mm-hmm. Experientially we don't. So if we meditate on that and reflect on that and come to have a taste that I've got a precious life, it's not going to last forever. I want to make it meaningful. Then what's going to happen again is all these things that we fill up our day with that are meaningless, we'll lose interest in them because we'll see they're a waste of time. And then we'll have time and energy to meditate and develop ourselves. So that's the fourth one, few activities. And then the fifth one is ethical discipline, which is ethics. And I think this is also in the preliminaries, the third of the preliminaries, to reflect on the causality of our actions. Harmful actions bring suffering. Beneficial actions bring happiness. And if we can really internalize that, we'll be very ethical. And I think ethics is the basis of any sort of meaningful life. And then the last one of the six is letting go of compulsive thinking. Most of us in the modern world have obsessive compulsive thinking about certain things. We tend to think about certain things all the time. But if we look at those things that we obsessively think about during the day, again, usually they're based on the view of happiness and sufferings out there. They're usually based on how can I get those things out there that are going to make me happy? Or how can I avoid those situations or those people out there that seem to give me suffering? So we have this obsessive thinking about how to control the things around us, how to get the nice things, how to avoid the unpleasant things, obsessively, compulsively. Mm-hmm. So again, if we can shift our worldview that the source of happiness and suffering is within, we can start to let go a lot of this obsessive, compulsive thinking. So if we can address those 6 points, and not just intellectually, because most of them, if we look at it, we go, yeah, that's right, tick, tick, yeah. I agree with all intellectually. That's not going to change anything. We need to make them experiential through reflecting and meditating on them. If we can bring them inside, we have a very good basis for shamatha. We have a very good basis for doing a daily shamatha practice. We have a very good basis for starting to integrate shamatha into our daily life. If we don't have that basis, shamatha practice will be, in a normal daily life environment, will be very difficult, and it'll be very difficult to make any progress. Mm-hmm. That's been my experience and many people I talk to. same experience. And then, what I would recommend in addition is if you can manage it once a week to have half day, particularly the morning, where you have no other activities. And then that half day in the morning up until lunch, you do meditation practice and reading and reflecting. Because if we do 1 hour shamatha every day, that's good. And if we try to bring that into daily life, that's good. But this little bit more once a week, just a few hours, we're only talking 3-4 hours. And we're not talking about sitting there meditating for 4 hours. We're talking about switching off the mobile phone, switching off everything, cutting out the outside world 100%, being in our apartment, and dedicate to some meditation, some reading, some practice. That is going to give us a boost. If we can do that once a week for one morning, if possible, that would be great.
And regarding kind of desires and this obsessive compulsive thinking, do you think is it cultural aspect? Maybe have you noticed some?
A lot of these, of course. I mean, where do we get our desires from? From when we were a little child, what our parents tell us, what our teachers tell us, what society's telling us, what these things are telling us now. I mean, of course. And one of the biggest enemies of shamatha practice is this. This is one of the biggest enemies of shamatha practice. I mean, this click culture of social media, Facebook, TikTok, WhatsApp, Instagram, all of that is a complete disaster for shamatha practice. So what I would recommend is if you're on social media, ideally get rid of all of it. If not, get rid of most of it, because it's an absolute disaster. The attention span of young kids today is going downhill with every generation, and one of the biggest reasons is this. It's because it's just this culture of, chopping and changing all the time. So try to reduce the use of this as much as possible, particularly social media. Absolute disaster for shamatha. So really cut a lot of that out. One other point before I forget. In our practice, sometimes people see the benefits of shamatha and they go hardcore. And maybe they do retreat, maybe not, maybe they just do 2 or 3 hours every day shamatha. But then they spin out because it's not balanced. Like a diet needs to be balanced. So in a diet, protein is good, but if we only eat protein and we don't eat anything else, disaster. So similarly, shamatha, we need balance. So in your daily practice, yes, you could emphasize shamatha, but we need to bring in some other practices to balance that for shamatha to be effective. And the two areas that are critical for that, one is compassion practice, like 4 immeasurables, loving kindness, compassion, to open the heart. Otherwise, shamatha can be very dry, and the loving kindness and compassion will give you a lot of fuel for shamatha. So this is very important. Because otherwise, shamatha, without loving kindness and compassion, we can get very narrow and very self-centered and very self-obsessed, because it's a single down focus. So we're cutting out a lot of the other things. So we need to make sure that we stay connected with the world through loving kindness and compassion practice. The one other thing essential together with shamatha practice is vipassana. Because if we don't do any insight practice, we're going to have a lot of grasping. And with grasping comes a lot of mental afflictions, attachment, aversion, jealousy, anxiety. All of these things come from strong self-grasping. So we need to start to weaken that a little bit through vipassana practice. And that vipassana practice can be Vipassana practice is difficult. So what I'd recommend is do a sort of vipassana practice that you resonate with and initially. So like sometimes people have done like the Goenka Vipassana. Mm-hmm. So they do body scan for impermanence. That's okay. Sometimes, in Tibetan, of course, a lot of emphasis on emptiness practice, but not so easy. But if you can do emptiness practice and you get some taste, very good. So some emptiness, no self, something to start to reduce the grasping and reduce the mental afflictions. Because if you don't, your shamatha will get torpedoed by the mental afflictions, by strong craving, strong aversion, jealousy, anxiety. All of these things will creep in and create a lot of obstacles in your shamatha practice. So they're the two things I would recommend that you bring in a little bit in your daily practices, some loving kindness, compassion, and some vipassana to support shamatha. With those two, your shamatha is going to go a lot better.
Mm-hmm. And is vipassana kind of analytical meditation?
It can be very analytical, or it can be not so analytical. It depends. Like the body scan is not really analytical. You're just scanning the body, seeing that the body is completely impermanent. You can also just scan the mind and see everything in the mind is coming, going, coming, going, coming, going. So that's not very analytical. Some of the emptiness meditations are quite analytical. So again, vipassana is not easy for beginners because our mind is not very focused and clear. So I would recommend do a sort of vipassana that you find easier and has some effect. Don't try to, initially at least, don't try to do vipassana practices that are extremely difficult.
I'm not really familiar with this practice. I heard that it's kind of analytical meditation, but I'm not really sure.
It is analytical in that you are asking questions. So even in the body scan, there is some analytical in that you're asking, is there something solid in the body? That's analysis. But you have a question, and then the analysis, that's it. Then you just look. You just scan the body, and you see there's nothing solid anywhere. Whereas other vipassana meditations, a lot of emptiness, is much more analytical approach and more difficult. So again, I would recommend to start with something you find a little bit easy. And if you're not so familiar with vipassana practice, I would recommend to start just doing body scan. With the question, is there anything solid in the body? And just look. Don't try to intellectually answer it because we know the answer. I mean, science has proven there's nothing solid in the body. Everything's changing. Atoms changing. We know that intellectually. Because if you just ask the question and you go, I know the answer. Of course everything's impermanent in the body. Then that's not vipassana practice. We need to look. So you just scan through the body and look. And then you can have an experience where there's no solid body anymore. It's just vibration. And that is helping to let go of this grasping to solid. And that will reduce your mental afflictions a little bit. Like craving, attachment. Because if you can see that the body and the things around you are just constantly changing, well then what's to grab? Attachment's got nothing to grab. Because it's just flux, isn't it? It's just change. It's like being in a flow. If you're in a flow, what's there to grab? There's not. Everything's just flowing. I mean, intellectually, we may know that everything around us is flowing, but that's not how it seems.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can do a little bit of meditation there and experientially see my body is just flow, things around me are just flow, that's going to be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And does this meditation maybe also apply to life and death questions, kind of that? Because you said, and I really feel that intellectually it's pretty obvious that there is death, and kind of okay, it everybody knows it, but making it from experience and changing maybe the way of life due to this knowledge, it seems like it's another some additional steps. For sure.
Yeah, exactly. If you can experience these sorts of things like life and death, you'll see there's just flow, it's just change, which means death. And actually, you'll see death happens every moment. Every moment, your body and mind it dies and is born, because it's change, isn't it? And if you can experience that, you'll understand that what we call death is just one more moment of death and birth, of just change. And then your perspective of life will be very different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, often people, and we see this, often people who have had these near-death experiences, you know, they've had some problem, some medical problem or something, or accident, and they've actually died and come back. And so they've seen death directly. Often these people, their lives are completely transformed. Often they're full of joy at life because they see how precious it is. And their outlook on life is completely changed. We can do this in meditation. We don't have to have a near-death experience.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask about some supportive practices. You just named it. It's kind of a loving kindness and vipassana, so it will help shamatha. And I also found such practices as maybe nondro Tibetan practices.
Well, nondro is what I said is preliminaries. That's nondro.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's two levels of nungdro. Nungdro is a Tibetan word meaning preliminary.
Mm-hmm.
What I've talked about so far for shamatha is what's called the common preliminaries. That is reflecting on precious human life, death, causality of actions, and the view of genuine happiness. In other words, the suffering of samsara. They're the four common preliminaries. These are the nungdro we should do for shamatha. Then in Tibetan Buddhism, above that, we have nungdro for tantra practice, which is doing things like
prostrations,
vajrasattva, mandala offering, guru yoga. For shamatha, we don't need that.
Mm-hmm.
So unless we are going into tantra practice, you can forget about those.
Actually, this Tibetan nondro with prostrations are pretty much challenging. And
of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, the problem is that in Dzogchen and Mahamudra, in the Kagyu Nyingma schools of Tibetan Buddhism, they go very quickly to the sort of the tantric level of practice. So what they do often, unfortunately, is they get a lot of new people in Buddhism. They say, okay, you need to do 100,000 prostrations, you need to do 100,000 vajrasattva, you need to do 100,000 mandala offerings, you need to do 100,000 guru yoga. Until you do that, I'm not going to teach you anything. That's tragedy. That's a big mistake, because what often happens is people don't know what these practices are. They don't understand them. They try the prostrations, they got aches and pains in their body, and they give up. Or they do the Vajrasattva and they go, what's this rubbish? And they give up. Mandala, what's this mandala thing? Give up. Guru Yoga, that's idol worship. Give up. So it's actually counterproductive to do those practices too early. So I wouldn't recommend to do them until you have already a good foundation.
Actually, I see it may be kind of good because maybe it was your lecture about inner willing. I'm not sure because I was recognizing the voice and I'm not whether it's yours or not. It was a speech about these Nyondro practices, and the lecturer said that the willing to do some practices come within him, and he only asked his teacher whether it's fitable, whether it's ok or not. But he didn't come to teacher and said, "Oh, teacher, what I should do?" Kind of that.
Yeah. So, if you have a personal teacher who gives you personal instruction, which is very difficult to find these days,
no, I have no.
They can guide you very closely and support you. But if you don't have that, which is most people don't have that, then I wouldn't go recommending doing all these high-level Nungdro practices just because you read it in a book somewhere. This would be a big mistake.
I see it may be a really kind of profitable from case of developing willpower.
Yeah, but the problem is we need perseverance or willpower, whatever you want to call it, but we can develop that in a much more effective way.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is if we do these practices just because of willpower, then actually we don't understand the practices and we won't get the benefit from the practices. We may develop some willpower, but it's going to come at a big cost. Because probably we're going to develop aversion to these practices because we don't understand them, because they're difficult. Yes, we may develop some willpower, but it's not going to end well.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be the motivation to do these practices is not to develop willpower.
Okay.
That would be a very poor motivation. So I wouldn't recommend jumping into those unless, again, if you have a personal teacher and they're guiding you and for some reason they decide that this particular practice is good for you now and explain the practice to you so you know what you're doing and they support you closely, then yes. But I wouldn't go just saying, oh, Nungdro, okay, I need to do that to start. Let's do 100,000 prostrations. Let's do these. What's this Vajrasattva thing? I got to do 100,000. I'm okay. I'll chant 100,000 of these mantras. Don't do it.
Yeah, no, actually, now it's pretty clear for me because this practice has some other goals, and willpower, it's kind of my assumption about these practices, which may be totally wrong.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a good basis already and you understand what these practices are for, what's the purpose, and you do them, then not only will you develop willpower, but you'll get a huge benefit from the practice because you'll have a good basis and you'll be doing the practice correctly and you'll be benefiting enormously. But I would only recommend to do them at the appropriate time. Don't do them without having a basis. You can develop a lot of willpower doing shamatha and loving kindness in vipassana.
And can you repeat please about basis? Basis is this 6 preliminaries to shamatha.
Right, and within those 6, what we can see is a lot of them depend on the common preliminaries, the common Nungdro. Precious human life, death and impermanence, The third one's often called karma, but causality of actions. And the fourth one is often in the text is listed like the disadvantages of samsara or something. But the fourth one is really about developing the view of genuine happiness, that suffering, source of happiness and suffering is coming within. Those four are very helpful to begin with at the beginning. Because why they're called common preliminaries is they're common to all Buddhist traditions. Whereas these other ones, these prostrations and vajrasattva, that's just for tantric practice.
Okay.
And we don't start with tantra. That comes maybe later.
Yeah, it was said that it somehow also impacts karma, but frankly speaking, until Buddhist this knowledge, I'm not really sure whether it exists or not, and it may be such silly things as kind of karma management. So,
but I mean, karma is really just ethics. It's causality, and I think all of us, deep in our heart, understand doing harmful things is not good. And we understand that doing good things is the right thing. So that's it. That's it. We can, all the other bits we can leave out for now. Just really understand, just basically ethical life. That's what we need to start with. Any other questions?
Yes, one more question is regarding kind of combining these practices with each other. So we have shamatha, we have loving kindness, and we have vipassana.
Yeah.
And actually, I wonder about the proportion of these practices. I asked one teacher. She said it really depends on individually. So
correct.
Yeah.
Just like a healthy diet, some people may need to eat more protein than other people. No. True.
Yeah, true.
So same here. And then sometimes for a particular person, at some point in their life, they may need to eat more protein, and some other points less protein. True. True. So similarly here, there's no fixed balance. It depends on the individual, and it depends where we are in our development. So what I would recommend in general would be, for most people as a beginner, it's good to emphasize shamatha, because in our modern world, most people's attention skills are very poor because of cultural things, because of these things, because there's so much stimulus we're bombarded with, that our mind is fragmented, our attention skills are very poor. And with very poor attention skills, if you try to do a lot of vipassana or loving kindness and compassion, they won't be effective because your mind will be scattered. So therefore, for most people, I would recommend initially, in the overall picture, a fair chunk should be shamatha. But then how much of vipassana and compassion, I think, depends on what's happening in our life. For example, if we're feeling low self-esteem, we're feeling not good about ourselves, we feel not very connected with people, then I would recommend more loving kindness and compassion. If we have a lot of mental afflictions, a lot of grasping, then more vipassana. So what I'm suggesting is to adjust the balance depending on what you feel is important at this point in your life. And that may change from one day to the next. So I would recommend to be a little bit flexible on how you balance it, and not just say, okay, 1/3 loving kindness, 1/3 shamatha, 1/3 vipassana. I think that's a little bit rigid. I mean, that if you don't know, then you can start doing that. But I would be balanced depending on, or if you find that your attention is all over the place, then maybe more shamatha. So I would adjust it depending on what's happening in your life. What's the best to focus on at that time?
Yes, it's a really great answer, because personally I and members of my family used to do some strict prescriptions, kind of 30 minutes of this, 40 minutes of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's good for most people. It's good to have some discipline, to some structure, but not to be too rigid. There's two extremes. There's being completely rigid, like you said, that's a little bit too tight. The other extreme is, I'll just do whatever comes up. I'll just whatever meditate, and then I'll just stop whenever I want. I think that for most people is not going to work either. So I think somewhere in between those two, we need to be. Some people need to be more up this end. They need to be more disciplined and structured. And for most beginners, probably we need to be more that end. As we get deeper into the practice, we probably can move a little bit more into the other way of being a little bit more flexible, more spontaneous, because we can go with the practice then. For beginners, if we try to be too spontaneous, we're just being lazy. Yeah? Our mind is telling us, I don't really want to meditate today, and we don't. So I would recommend for most people to be more, not rigid, but more structured and disciplined. Like have a certain, like a timer, how long you meditate, what you're going to meditate on, and then stick to that. And then, of course, if you find that you think you need to do less shamatha and more loving kindness, then yeah, you adjust that. But if you're too flexible, too spontaneous, I think we just end up being lazy. You know, for me, certainly.
Yeah.
If I'm too spontaneous, I just get lazy.
Actually, suppose the last question that appeared is actually I don't know, kind of. I see that maybe I should probably start from Vipassana because of some grasping. Yeah.
I would, but again, I would start with easy Vipassana, like body scan, maybe looking at the mind, seeing how everything's just constantly changing in the mind.
So
that sort of thing. Impermanence for Vipassana, generally impermanence is the easiest to start with because we see it everywhere. Emptiness and no self, Vipassana practice is much more difficult. Nature of mind practice, much more difficult. So I would start with impermanence.
But how does Vipassana body scan differs from Shamatha body scan as body as object?
Because in Shamatha we don't do body scan. Because body scan in Shamatha is we're moving too much. Shamatha is single point. And also the difference between Shamatha and Vipassana is always with a question. If you have no question and you just look at the body, that's Shamatha. If you have a question, is there anything stable in the body? And then you look, then it's Vipassana.
Yeah, and regarding Shamatha, regarding actually preparation practices before Shamatha itself.
At the beginning of a meditation?
Yes. So kind of preparation of body, speech and mind.
Yeah, then you can do a body scan to release tension. Yes, you can do that.
Yes, and I find that it seems like I would like to prolong it, just kind of to change the object of meditations. So the first one is full body, and after period some time is stomach, and the third one is nostrils, the last one, but it happens in one session, and I'm really curious. So should we just kind of prepare body, speech, and mind, and kind of focus on one object?
What I would recommend again is...
sorry. You know, it's kind of, when I'm sitting, I feel that, it seems like not stability. Then I'm trying to focus in on stomach, and it means that more stability comes. Oh, okay, more tight. Next, come to full body to relax.
Yeah, right. So what I would recommend here is pick one variation of the breath practice that you really find effective, whether it's nostrils, abdomen, or full body.
Mm-hmm.
The full body, I think, is good for relaxation. So if you are still having often a lot of tightness and tension, then just meditate on full body for weeks or months until you can relax more better. So just do that for weeks or months. If you have a lot of tension in the body, just do that as your shamatha object. Then once you find that you're more relaxed, then you can pick either the abdomen or the nostrils as your object.
Mm-hmm.
And stick with that object. If you're using the nostrils and you find in a particular meditation you're really getting tense and you can't release it, then yes, temporarily for some minutes you can go back to the abdomen or full body to get relaxed and then go back to the breath.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. But I would stay with one as a general rule, because then you'll get better and better. If in every session you're moving backwards and forwards all the time between nostrils, abdomen, full body, then that's probably not so good.
Yeah.
But there's no point in starting with the nostrils if, in general, in shamatha practice, you're quite tense.
Mm-hmm.
If you're normally quite tense, I wouldn't recommend starting here, because you're just going to get more tense. So I would leave that out altogether. I would only go here as your object if you find that you can stay quite relaxed in general.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't stay quite relaxed in general when you go here, I wouldn't go there. Because what's going to happen is you may get stability and clarity here, but underlying that will be a lot of tension. And then you're going to get a lot of tension across the forehead, and sometimes stiff neck. You may get tension headache. I mean, if you start to develop those habits, very difficult to get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you are very stable and clear here, but you notice a lot of tension in the head, don't stay there, because you're going to develop bad habits.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tension.
Yes, it's a really good mention. Yeah. And wanted to ask about kind of timing strategy. So I heard that meditation may be kind of splitted, so it should be kind of frequent, more frequent than longer.
As a beginner, yes. Because the problem is, if we try and meditate too long as a beginner, for the last part of the meditation, we're not going to be able to be focused. We're just going to go off on daydream, distraction, sleepy, and then we're actually increasing the faults we're trying to decrease. So more is not better. So if you're finding that in your meditation that normally part way through you lose interest in the meditation, you're meditating too long. So cut it down and have lots of short sessions. How short will depend on us as an individual. But you should be finishing the meditation, like if you have a timer,
Mm-hmm.
if your experience is that when the timer goes off, you go, ah, good. If that's your experience, you're meditating too long.
Mm-hmm.
You're meditating too long because you're hoping or waiting for the timer to come. So you're not doing the practice. What you should be having as an experience is that the timer goes and you go, oh, actually, I would like to do a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
If your experience is always relief when the timer rings, you're meditating too long.
Yeah,
Cut it down,
I got it.
Cut it down. And then over time, you can extend a little bit. When you get more into practice, if your normal experience is when the timer goes off, if your normal experience is, oh, I really would have liked to do a little bit more, if that's your normal experience, that's a sign to increase a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But if your normal experience is, whew, time has gone, good, you're meditating too long. I mean, every so often that'll happen. Certain days you'll feel agitated and it'll be a bit of a relief that the timer goes. Okay, but if that's happening every day, then you're meditating too long.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do shorter and more sessions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's pretty all my questions that I had. Yeah, I recorded this video for myself, so I will be able to check it once again.
Sure, no problems.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. And I'm really curious, can I just ask you maybe in some periods of time for such sessions if questions appear?
Certainly for the next for up until the end of March, yes. April, May, I'm fairly busy, but I can still probably do it. And then in July onwards, I'm in theory going to be doing a lot of traveling, so that might be a bit difficult. But the thing is, just contact me and ask and see where I'm at.
I think it's not be so frequent, you know. If some particular question appears, I will probably ask.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the best is if you can work it out yourself. That's the best. So sometimes what people do is if they know there's someone there they can ask, as soon as they have a question, they ask the question. That's not very good for our own development. If we have a question, then sit on it, think about it, reflect on it, and you may find that the answer will come. If it doesn't, eventually then yes, you can ask someone. But if you're just running away asking people all the time, as soon as you have a question, that's not very good for our own development. If we can get the answer ourselves, that's the best.
Yeah.
But if not, then yes, you eventually can.
Actually, the session was pretty useful. I will focus on Vipassana because until now I haven't checked it, and I know such kind of analytical meditation, but it was not formally meditation. It's kind of put a certain timer and trying to think only on one object, on question, and finding solution for this question. Yeah, and it was also useful regarding Nyondro because it's some other Buddhist way, I don't know, Buddhist path. Thank you a lot, Glenn.
Sure, no problems. Take care.
See you.
Bye.